Ko Phil Bremer, toku ingoa, no mai, haere mai. As Acting Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic, it is my great pleasure to welcome you here tonight to celebrate Professor Connor's achievements. I'd especially like to welcome Dr. Connor's family. Joining us in person is her partner David and her son Graham. Welcome. And on the live Zoom is her mother Patricia and a sizable number of a California family, including cousins, aunts and uncles. I'm very glad that you're able to share this very special occasion with us. It's not easy to become a professor at the University of Otago. The title of professor is reserved for the highest achieving academics. It takes ability, commitment, and hard work to become a professor. You need to be able to demonstrate that you're a leader in your field of research, an outstanding teacher, and that you're providing significant service to the academic and broader community. As you will hear tonight, Dr. Connor has clearly earned the title of professor. Congratulations. I first met Tamlin 12 years ago when we co-supervised a PhD student together. Her intellect and ability, and more importantly, her support for her students were evident to me then, and I'm very delighted to be the host for an inaugural professorial lecture. I'm also very much looking forward to learning more about what must be one of the most uplifting research topics on campus, investigating what makes people healthy and happy. I'd like to now invite the Bro Vice-Chancellor of the Division of Science, Professor Richard Barker, to introduce Professor Connor.
Professor Bremer, tēnā koe. Professor Connor, tēnā koe. Professor Halberstadt, tēnā koe. Graham, tēnā koe. Friends and colleagues, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. It is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Professor Tamlin Connor from the Department of Psychology, to give her inaugural professorial lecture at the University of Otago. As indicated by Professor Bremer, Tamlin was promoted to professor in February of this year, and tonight we get to celebrate this significant achievement. Professor Connor grew up in California, by the beach and in the sun, and after attending Corona Del Mar High School, she headed off to the University of Colorado Boulder, where she majored in psychology with a minor in philosophy. Graduated magna cum laude before heading across the continent to Boston College, where she received her PhD in 2003. Interestingly, Tamlin started as a journalism major. She hated the short deadlines and the pace of it and wanted something slower and that would allow her to engage more deeply into understanding people. So she moved to psychology. And I guess the university is a perfect place for someone who doesn't like fast pace and deadlines. Tamlin's PhD was followed by a series of academic appointments, first as a teaching assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at Boston College, followed by a postdoctoral fellowship in psychiatry at the University of Connecticut School of Medicine, before migrating across the Pacific to join us as a lecturer in 2008. She's been here ever since, and now, just about a decade and a half later, we celebrate her impressive rise through the academic ranks from lecturer to full professor. As we've heard from Professor Bremer, promotion to full professor at the University of Otago is far from easy, and you must excel in all of the academic domains of teaching, research and service. Professor Connor has truly excelled. Her research is both prolific and impactful. She has more than 100 peer-reviewed published outputs, and if I can borrow from her HOD's helpful comments on her promotion application, she works at the forefront of two hot areas in the field, one methodological and one topical. Tamlin is a world-leading expert on experience sampling. These are longitudinal measurements involving daily self-report by individual participants going about their daily lives, also known as ambulatory assessment. She has literally written the book on this. With her expertise, she has advised thousands of other researchers in diverse fields. Her own specialty, well suited to experience sampling, is subjective well-being, itself an increasingly important area in terms of theory and public policy. Many societies, including our own, have begun to measure the health of their economies, not only in economic terms, but also in social ones. And Tamlin's work will be at the cutting edge in terms of quantifying this well-being economy. Professor Connor is also an outstanding teacher. And at the time of her promotion application, her HOD remarked on her extended and consistent history of teaching, commitment, innovation, and leadership. Her teaching includes 2 popular papers, Psych 422, Contemporary Issues in Psychology, and Psych 324, Health Psychology. And in these, she provides her signature one-on-one speed-back writing feedback and innovation that she has shared with her colleagues here at the university in our Higher Education Development Centre and also in international workshops. She is a popular and award-winning supervisor, and since joining the university in 2008, has supervised 16 PhD students, 14 master's students and 23 honours students, 53 in all if you were keeping up. 2 of her PhD students had their theses recognised as exceptional doctoral theses in the Division of Sciences. Her teaching has been recognised by awards, and this goes right back to the beginning when she started as a teacher at Boston College, where she won a Graduate Student Teaching Excellence Award. And then at Otago in 2009, she was a nominee for the Otago University Students Association Teaching Award. In 2015, was nominated for the Outstanding Student Support Award, Advising and Mentoring Award by the Division of Sciences here at the university. In 2017, she was awarded Supervisor of the Year within the Division of Sciences and the Otago University's in the Division of Sciences by the Otago University Students Association, and in 2018 was a nominee for the Otago University Students Association Teaching Award again. The final academic domain in which staff must excel to be promoted is service. Within the department, Tamlin has had a number of roles, including as Chief Advisor of Studies for most of the past decade, and she established largely on her own the first student society in the Department of Psychology. Outside the department, she chairs the University of Otago Research Grants, Social, Human and Behavioural Sciences panel, is a member of our research committee, and is also a panel member of the Royal Society's Marsden Assessment Panel for Economics and Human and Behavioural Sciences. She's a proposal assessor for MBIE. Recognised for her leadership potential, in 2022, last year, Tamlin was a delegate for the Te Manahua New Zealand Women in Leadership academic program, just one of 2 women's faculty selected from the University of Otago, based on their experience, their aspiration and their capacity for senior leadership positions in academia. I think you've heard enough from me. It's now time to hear from Professor Connor herself, one of our fabulous women in science here at the University of Otago. Please join me in welcoming Professor Tamlin Connor.
Thank you. So I've given a lot of talks in my life, and when I gave my first talk, my dad, who did a lot of public speaking, he said, Tamlin, if you're nervous, just the first thing that you need to do is take a sip of water. So I'm going to do that right now, and I'll continue with the story. And the first time I did that at my first scientific talk, poured the contents of the water entirely down the front of me. So I've managed to not do that right now, and I think I'm on to a good start. Thanks so much for coming. I'm going to just start off by asking you a question. Are you happy? This may seem like a simple question with a simple answer, but what I hope to show you today is that the factors that can contribute to our happiness are far more complex. And in fact, they are rich and varied. And your happiness may even be impacted by what you eat, including this apple. So today I want to share with you my research on pathways to well-being. What does my research say about how to be happier, focusing on modifiable lifestyle habits that improve or impede well-being. And I would like to dedicate my lecture to 4 people who have been influential in my life thus far. My partner David and son Graham, I'm going to try not to cry. You have enriched my life immensely and challenged me to be a better and broader person, and I love you with all my heart. My mother, Patricia Connor, who nurtured my own heart as I developed, she nurtured my love for reading and organization, and you are my biggest cheerleader, and I love you. And my late father, Charles P. Connor, for instilling in me the importance of education. Now, he was a businessman by profession, but in his heart, he was an educator and a mentor. And his advice to me was always, Tam, eat the big frog first. And I didn't know it at the time, but it turns out this is a Mark Twain quote, who wrote, "If it's your job to eat a frog, it's best to do it first thing in the morning, and if it's your job to eat 2 frogs, it's best to eat the biggest one first." Well, Dad, I have eaten a lot of frogs, and I'm dedicating this particular frog talk to you. Now, I'll confess, if you had met me as an adolescent growing up in Southern California in the 1980s, you might not have thought that I would be a professor in the 2020s. Even my first scientific poster, I misspelled hypothesis. But the seeds of my academic interest, however nascent, were there even as an adolescent. First, I was curious. I wanted to know about people and how they acted in their worlds. And I would even go out and spend time people watching and just to see how people acted. And then the second thing is I had an intense desire not to go into my father's escrow business. So I undertook my undergraduate degree, which is a Bachelor of Arts at the University of Colorado at Boulder. I tend to go to universities in very beautiful places. Boulder is one of them, but Otago is more beautiful. After a couple of years of soul-searching, major switching, as Richard mentioned, starting out in journalism and not liking the time frame of it, I decided to major in psychology and follow my curiosity of people and their psychological lives. And I was fortunate to complete an honors thesis with Professor Lou Harvey at the time, and we did a really interesting project on perception without awareness, the idea that you could be influenced by processes outside of your awareness. And I learned a lot of things from Lou at that time. One of them was that I actually had capacity for academic work, and I didn't know that up to that point. And then the other was that you could be a professor and still maintain your sense of humor. Now, like most psychology students, I have been saving these pictures my entire life to use. Like most psychology students, I considered clinical psychology, and because that's what you do when you're a psychology major. You say, okay, I'm going to go into clinical psychology. So I did what I advise my students to do, which is to place yourself in that working situation, in that environment where you think you want to work in. So I did just that. Right before I graduated, I went to work at a psychiatric hospital just outside of Denver. I was a behavioral technician, and it was one of the worst jobs I've ever had in my entire life. It was terrible. And aside from lighting residents' cigarettes, this was what we did in the 1990s, I didn't see at all how anything that I was doing was helping the residents to lead better lives. I also at the time tried out for a peer-to-peer psychological help hotline at Boulder, and in a mock call, absolutely said the wrong things and was told quite clearly in the end that I was ill-suited to counseling actual people. So at that time I thought, okay, right, I was a little devastated, but the universe was trying to signal something to me, and maybe that signal was that maybe I should not go into clinical psychology. Now at the same time, I was teaching students. I was a teaching assistant for Introduction to Psychology, and I had a class of 30 students, and I got to teach them things, I got to engage them in discussion, and I really enjoyed it. And it turns out that I was much better at teaching than I was counseling. So I listened to my heart, I assessed my strengths and my weaknesses, and decided that I think I could be a university professor. And now here I am. So I decided, how do you become a professor? How do you teach university? Well, you get your PhD. So I decided to do my PhD. And I wanted to do something that wasn't clinical psychology, but still involved people. So I went and did a PhD in social psychology at Boston College. Now, during my PhD, the hard work of cultivating my mind began. And I did my PhD in Boston College with Professor Lisa Feldman Barrett, and Lisa turned out to be an outstanding choice because she is one of the smartest and most accomplished psychological scientists of the 21st century. She taught me how to write well, she taught me how to think well, and she taught me how to be resilient in the face of challenge. Lots of challenges. And it was during my PhD that I developed an appreciation for doing psychological research outside of the laboratory to capture life as it's lived. Inspired by the work of my PhD supervisor at the time, and what was then a really innovative technology, which now looks so ancient. Palm-top computers, personal digital assistants. I mean, this even came before Blackberries. And so this would eventually lead to what we use today, what everybody has in their pocket, the smartphone. And so, as Richard mentioned, I developed an expertise in the experience sampling method, which involves using this technology to signal people in real time, over time, in people's natural environments. And using this technology, you can capture a lot of rich, detailed information. For example, a person's emotional signature of how happy they feel over the course of 13 days. This is actual data from a person in one of my studies. And so some of the earliest and first publications I did in graduate school applied these types of methods to understanding people's daily lives. And in one publication, I used a once daily diary method to track people, to have people report on their emotional experiences at the end of every day for 7 days, and then after, remember how they reported feeling, showing that people higher in self-esteem remembered their experiences as being much more positive than they actually reported them. Another study showed that some of the associations that we may hold about ourselves that are outside of our conscious awareness may affect how we feel in the ebb and flow of our daily lives, suggesting a hidden vulnerability. And this work actually built off of the undergraduate thesis that I did with Lou Harvey, reflecting my interest in unconscious processes. Now, in fact, my interest in understanding people in their natural environments is informed by my entire academic lineage, which I only figured out recently that you can actually see the echoes of this perspective and approach of measuring people in their environments all the way back. So it's informed not only by the work of my supervisor, Lisa Feldman Barrett, on her work on experienced emotion, and her supervisor, Michael Ross, on the science of self-reports, but his academic grandfather, Kurt Lewin, and my academic great-great-grandfather, Kurt Lewin, who is the famous German-American scholar, noted founder of social psychology, and developer of the famous Lewin equation, which held that behavior is a function of the person in their environment. And this equation places special importance on understanding how a person is functioning and how they're being influenced by their immediate context. And the thinking of this equation is that you cannot understand a person by extracting them out of their environment. To really understand a person, you have to see how they're behaving and functioning in their naturalistic settings. And that's exactly what I'm continuing on to this day. Now, little did I know that my methodology training with Lisa would evolve into a full-blown academic identity, literally as the expert in experience sampling methods, starting with my primer, A Practical Guide to Experience Sampling Procedure. Very, very direct title. A primer about experience sampling methods, which I wrote during my PhD, and followed by several invited methodology articles, a theory article, and ultimately leading to my co-editing the Handbook of Research Methods for Studying Daily Life with my fabulous co-editor, Matthias Mell, with the help of these incredible contributing authors. Now, my research career was also influenced by my postdoctoral fellowship with Professor Howard Tenen at the University of Connecticut Medical School. And here I expanded my research on social psychology, shifting it to understanding health, which included young adult alcohol use, the emotional experience of patient populations, for example, people with rheumatoid arthritis, and also doing some work on genetic predictors of alcohol use and emotional experience. Now, this postdoc was influential for two reasons. And the first is that I discovered my love of interdisciplinary research, the idea of combining research from one field and combining that and applying that to another. So in this case, applying some of the methods that I learned in social psychology and applying that within psychiatry, health, and even genetics. And some of the research that I published during this time focused on understanding the daily lived emotional experiences of people with chronic health conditions. So for example, here we did a study looking at people with rheumatoid arthritis pain and found that those people who had a history of depression, who had arthritis pain, their emotions were much more strongly tied to their pain than people without a history of depression, suggesting that formerly depressed people manage and cope with their pain differently from people without a history of depression. Other research during this time looked at how certain genetic variants related to serotonin function predict differences in people's daily emotional states, modulate how anxiously they react to daily stressors, and how these genetic polymorphisms even interact with stressful life events to predict their likelihood of alcohol and drug intake. Now, the second reason that this postdoc was very influential is that it helped me secure my dream job here at the University of Otago. Yay! Department of Psychology, and what a great department this is. I'm a huge Otago champion because I have outstanding colleagues, and I have outstanding students, and now outstanding friends. I arrived in 2008 and started my own lab here called the Daily Experiences Lab. Now, one of the first projects that I did was actually a very surprising project because I didn't start out researching fruit and vegetable intake. Although I think it's fitting that I have moved into this field because it turns out that I am turning into my mother because my mother is a nutritionist, or was a nutritionist in her. So I think it's pretty fitting. Now, at the time when I first arrived here, Kate Berard, our outstanding research advisor from the Division of Sciences, put me in touch with Caroline Horwath, then in the Department of Human Nutrition. And we decided that we'd co-supervise a master's student right in that first year that I arrived. And we were going to do a project to look at stress-related eating. The idea that, to test the hypothesis that do people eat worse food, unhealthier food, when they're stressed? So I ran a daily diary study of 300 students who, at the end of every day for 21 days, reported on their stressors that day, their mood, their well-being, their healthy foods, their unhealthy foods. I mean, it was a really large survey. We asked a lot of questions. And then our goal was to test whether people ate more unhealthy foods on high-stress days. When we analyzed the data, we did not find any evidence of that at all. There was actually no connection between stress and eating, which was actually really surprising at the time. It went against some literature that suggests we would find that. But an interesting signal stood out in the data that we weren't expecting and we hadn't seen before. And that was, there was a unique coupling between people's intake of fruits and vegetables and their reports of happiness, or more broadly, positive affect. So reports of happiness, excitement, energy, enthusiasm. And this is what the data found. So the more daily servings of fruits and vegetables people are eating, the higher their positive affect. not only did people who eat more fruits and vegetables feel happier, but on days when people ate more fruits and vegetables than they usually did, they felt happier than they usually do. So we found this at the between-person level and at the within-person level. Not only that, and this association occurred regardless of gender, age, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and even personality traits. Now, this is just an association, so we tried to tease out which comes first. Is it the mood that comes first, and the mood predicts the food, or is it the food that comes first, and that predicts your mood? And when we did some lagged statistical analyses, we found that it was the food that seemed to be driving the mood, and not the other way around. We published this finding in the British Journal of Health Psychology, which has now been cited over 260 times. Like good psychological scientists, though, we need to replicate this finding. So in the next study that I ran, again, a large daily diary study, this pattern kept emerging. Here, in a data set of 500 people, again, we found that people who ate more fruits and vegetables reported not only higher positive affect, but greater flourishing, which refers to a state of well-being characterized by feelings of engagement, meaning, and purpose. Again, we see this at the between-person level and at the within-person level. So when people eat better than they normally do, they feel better than they normally do. And this research provided one of the first pieces of evidence that what we eat may influence not only our physical health, but also our mental health as well. This research also led to a very embarrassing, rather large front page ad thing on the Otago Daily Times saying, with a very large picture, here featured with carrots. This was actually a compromise. They wanted me to model other kinds of fruits, but we decided to compromise on carrots here, that healthy food equals lighter mood, study shows. So why? Why might there be this association between fruits and vegetables and greater well-being? Well, there may be biologically plausible mechanisms linking the two. Fruits and vegetables contain a variety of micronutrients critical to mental and physical function. They contain antioxidants like vitamin C, E, and carotenoids, which reduce bodily inflammation, which we know inflammation is bad for mood. Vitamin C, B, and complex carbs are also cofactors in the production of dopamine. Now, dopamine is a neurotransmitter that some have argued not only underlie feelings of motivation, but also a zest for life, which sounds very similar to well-being. And at this stage, my research had contributed to that strong correlational evidence linking the two, but there was not any causal evidence because research had not yet done intervention trials to see whether there may be a causal relationship. So that's what I set out to do next, is to do intervention research to see if we can change people's dietary patterns and test the impacts to their well-being. First, and I'm going to tell you about two interventions today. So the first intervention was the Let Them Eat Fruit study, which formed the basis of Kate Brookie's PhD thesis and represented my first collaboration with Marguerite Vissers, the vitamin C researcher from the University of Otago Christchurch campus. And we ran a pre-registered 2-week intervention, so it was a relatively brief intervention to test whether increasing young adults' fruit and vegetable intake would promote improvements to their well-being. We had 3 conditions. So we randomized people to either a diet as usual control group, where we didn't intervene in their diet, an ecological momentary intervention condition, which is just a messaging condition where we sent them targeted messages to remember to eat your fruits and vegetables and try to incorporate it into your diet today. And we also gave them money. We gave them a voucher to purchase fruits and vegetables too, so removing that barrier. And then the third condition was a straight-up fruit and vegetable condition where we gave them the fruits and vegetables to eat on top of their normal diet. And then across the 14 days, we used smartphone tracking of their self-reported fruit and vegetable intake, their mood, and their well-being. So this study was really fun to run because Kate would be pushing trolleys of fruit and vegetables from Veggie Boys. And so, yeah, it was really quite fun fun to run. And what did we find? Did we find any evidence that there's a causal relationship? And in fact, we did. That those in the fruit and vegetable condition, here the line shown in black, reported significant improvements to their well-being over the 14 days. So using growth curve modeling, we could show that the trajectory of well-being for this group was increasing, whereas the other two groups didn't show any changes to their well-being over time. So the messages didn't work, but providing them with the food did. And this research was one of the first studies using a randomized design to suggest a causal effect of increasing fruit and vegetable intake on changes to well-being. And the change wasn't small either. It was about like a 12 to 15% increase in well-being as a function of the intervention condition compared to control. This also led to a intense scrutiny on a Reddit science subthread that yielded some valid observations about nutritional psychology research more broadly and our trial design. So and some of them are kind of funny, but some of them actually, they have very good points. So another finding of this study is that nagging people to eat more fruits and vegetables is ineffective at improving their health. This finding is robust even to the extreme levels of nagging engaged in by the researchers. Fair point. Next person said, so they found that giving people some free gifts every day makes them happy, while telling them to get their own damn food makes them sad. Maybe if they handed them some hamburgers, they would be even happier. Or, I wonder how much of this is a placebo. Fruits are good for me. I can feel the difference. Good point. And finally, what do you mean eating scores of processed non-food garbage is bad for my brain? So on the basis of this criticism and some valid concerns about how do we actively control for placebo effects in a dietary trial, and we weren't too depressed to stop persisting in this research, we decided to run an even larger trial called the QVC for Vitality trial. And this is the second intervention that I'll tell you about. So this work formed the basis of Ben Fletcher's PhD and continued my collaboration with Marguerite Vissers. And then we also had, thank goodness, a biostatistician join our team, Jill Hazard, to help us analyze our data actually properly. Thank you, Jill. And this work was funded by Zespri, the kiwi fruit company, and consisted of an 8-week trial where we recruited adults who didn't consume very many fruits and vegetables, so they had really low blood levels of vitamin C. We recruited them, we randomized them into 3 groups. So one group ate 2 sun-gold kiwi fruits every day for 4 weeks. Another group got the equivalent amount of vitamin C in a tablet. And then the third group was a placebo group that they had a placebo tablet that looked and smelled and tasted exactly like the vitamin C tablet. So we could try to control for some of the psychological expectancies of getting a vitamin C tablet in this study. And we tracked their mood and well-being across the 8-week period. And what we found was, following the introduction of the intervention, here shown in weeks 2, 4, and 6, you can see that participants in the kiwi fruit and the vitamin C condition, here shown in green and orange, showed significant increases in their well-being scores relative to the placebo control group. And what this finding suggested to us is, one, this vitamin C might be one of the biochemical mechanisms underlying the link between fruit and vegetable intake and well-being, and it also suggests that we're restoring optimal vitamin C levels in people who have low vitamin C may elevate their feelings of well-being in a causal fashion. Now, within this kiwi fruit study, my PhD student, Ben, used high-resolution smartphone surveys, and so he's the one who managed all of this, and it was really difficult in this trial. We used high-resolution smartphone surveys of daily well-being, so we had them complete a survey every other day through this entire 8-week trial to look at the more fine-grained temporal resolution in terms of their changes in well-being over time. And day 0 here in this graph is when they got the kiwi fruit or the vitamin C or the placebo tablets. And you can see there was small changes you can actually start to see the emergence of mood changes even as early as days 4 to 6 into the intervention. And then it dipped down a little bit around day 10, but then came up day 14. So this type of research of using this intensive micro-longitudinal data gathering isn't done very much in nutritional research, but it is done a lot in social psychology. So merging the two, you can see the value of this. So other discoveries in the nutrition and psychology space that I've been doing include understanding the role of vitamin D in mood with my then PhD student Maria Shaukri and her co-supervisor Lisa Houghton, and also other team-based projects looking at how optimal levels of blood iron and selenium contribute to mood, led by my then master's student, Amy Richardson, with her co-supervisory team, Anne Louise Heath and Jody Miller, also from Human Nutrition. And my current research in this area is evolving to look at how diet intersects with other types of health behaviors, because we know that diet itself doesn't just occur in a vacuum. There's other types of healthy lifestyles that we can lead, how well we exercise, how much we sleep. So with my then master's student, Shay Wickham, who is now a PhD student supervised by Rachel Taylor and Jill Hazard and myself as a third co-supervisor, Shay and I published a study a few years ago where we called Diet, Exercise, and Sleep the Big Three Health Behaviors, and published a study showing how all three make important contributions to people's well-being. So we're continuing this research looking at other projects. And then more recently, my current PhD student, Jack Cooper, co-supervised by Robin Turner, also in biostatistics, we're tracking people's big three health behaviors through both smartphone surveys and wearable devices. So like Fitbits and other types of technology, and modeling their relative impact to daily well-being. Finding that again, all of three of these behaviors are important predictors of daily well-being, and they might have interesting synergistic effects to impact our well-being. Now, alongside these health behaviors, my work is focused on three other modifiable behaviors that predict well-being. First, nature. So being in nature. Work with my PhD student, Izuru Satu, and our collaborator, Paul Joes from Victoria University of Wellington. We ran several daily diary studies where we asked people to what extent they'd been in nature today, and we found that well-being was higher on days when people spent 20 minutes in nature, and highest on days in which they spent 60 minutes in nature. And then also, I'm not showing you this, but when we intervened, we did an intervention study to randomize people to walk in the city versus walk in nature. So go do an hour walk in the city versus in the nature. Well-being was only boosted by the nature walk. Second, practicing mindfulness. Work with my PhD student, Jade Flett, and her co-supervisory team, myself, Harleen Hain, and Tess Patterson. We've run several trials of popular mindfulness apps. So mindfulness apps have become very popular in the past years. But do they work? So let's put it to the scientific test. And what we found is, yes, they do work. But they only work when people use the apps. And do they use the apps? No, they don't use the apps. They download them, they use them for a few days, but then after that, they stop using them. But if you ask them if they use them, they say that they use them. So we also published a paper on the peril of self-reported adherence to digital interventions, a brief example. And the last modifiable behavior that I'll tell you about today is engaging in one's creativity. And I'm not talking about big C creativity that's associated with master works of genius where you have to dedicate your life to your craft and you go to school for it or you're an artiste. No, I'm talking about little C. It's little C or everyday creativity that's associated with small things that we do in our daily lives that can tap into. I mean, it's similar to my other research in that it's like micro-level creativity. Little things like drawing, painting, playing music, writing, designing colorful slides for a talk, and even baking. And this work was inspired by the visits of 2 William Evans Fellows to Otago, Paul Sylvia and Colin DeYoung. And across 2 daily diary studies, we observed that on days in which people reported being more creative, their well-being was higher. And then when we tried to tease out which comes first, does being creative promote future feelings of well-being, or is it that feelings of well-being promote future feelings of creativity? Which way is it? Well, when we analyzed the data, we found that it's the creativity that predicts changes in well-being and not the other way around. And this, too, has led to some interesting headlines, particularly during the pandemic when people were baking a lot at home. So feeling down, scientists say cooking and baking could help you feel better. A little creativity each day goes a long way. But of course, any benefit of baking the cupcakes is if you eat them, this is the problem, it's going to increase your levels of inflammation, which is going to impair your mood. So it probably just cancels each other out. Now, my research is not just about modifiable habits for happiness. It also continues to understand the emotional lives of special populations of people. And the 2 that I want to highlight here is work that Phil mentioned we did on people with food allergies. So looking at what are some of the challenges that people living with food allergies face in their daily lives, and this is work led by our PhD student, Rana Peniamina, with Miranda Morosa and Phil Bremer in food science. And here we tracked people's experiences and challenges of living with food allergies over time in their daily lives. And one of the interesting findings that we found is that we found that people with a particular personality trait of being higher in openness to experience, they had the most challenges of coping with their food allergies in everyday life. And it looks like the demands of coping with a food allergy, requiring caution, routine, consumption of known foods, is in direct conflict with their personality traits that crave exploration, variety, and novel experiences, including novel foods. So it's an interesting conflict between the personality and the demands of coping with that, and the consequence to their emotions. I've also done research on people living with rheumatoid arthritis with our PhD student, Rasheen Hegarty, my collaborator, Gareth Terharn, and Simon Stebbings from the Department of Medicine, Gareth from psychology, of course. This has yielded some pretty interesting insights into how people cope with experiencing pain and fatigue in their daily lives. And we showed that, not surprisingly, when people experience fatigue through their rheumatoid arthritis, this has significant impairments to their mood states. But that people who can be more mindful in their daily lives or engage in personally meaningful activities, whether socializing, reading, working, cooking, things that are meaningful to them, however they define them, they're able to cope better in the face of their fatigue, suggesting possible targets for intervention. I've also continued my research into young adult alcohol use, its causes, its correlates, and interventions to reduce risky drinking. And my 2 key collaborators in this area are Ben Reardon, my former PhD student, and Associate Professor Damien Scarf, we co-supervised Ben. And here we have used text messaging to initially track young adults drinking during high periods of risk. So for example, during orientation week, we would send them a text in the nighttime, say, how many alcoholic drinks did you have yesterday? How many did you have tonight? And in one of our initial studies showed that the amount of alcohol that young adults consume during a period of risk, during orientation week, predicts their patterns of drinking across the academic year, suggesting that maybe if we intervene during orientation week to reduce their drinking, this could have positive flow-on consequences for reducing their alcohol use later on. That's exactly what we found in a couple of other interventions where we did these brief interventions and send them targeted messages during orientation week. For example, tonight, think about your mates when you drink. You can ruin their nights too. So we experimented with health messages. Students don't care about health at all, but they care about their friends. So the friend messages worked, the health messages don't. Changing women is easier, changing men is harder. So we did a lot of this type of intervention research. And then as part of this work, we also recognized the limitations of solely relying on self-reported alcohol use and branched out into measuring blood alcohol concentration with police-grade breathalyzers. And this was really fun work that we had some of our students go out to large social gatherings, and in one study they breathalyzed over 500 students and compared their blood alcohol concentration from the device measurements to people's self-reported levels of intoxication. And we found actually that there was pretty good correspondence between their objective and subjective levels of intoxication, except at very high levels of intoxication. When people were really bad, they underestimated how drunk they actually were. And lastly, I've been focused on understanding another important health behavior for young adults, which is vaping, which is quickly shifting from being used as a smoking cessation tool to its own growing public health concern. And my first foray into this topic was collaborating on a project to explore pathways from smoking to vaping in people who we gave a vaping device to try to help them quit smoking. And this is work that I did with Professor Janet Hook and Mei Ling Blank, Jimmy Zhang, and Vicky He. And we gave them a vape, encouraged them to try to quit smoking, and tracked their vaping and smoking patterns over time for a very long time. And here, what we showed is that each person has their own unique journey from smoking to vaping over time. This is a sequence plot that every row is a person, and each square in the row is a day that we measured them. And the color of the square is whether they reported smoking cigarettes that day in blue, whether they reported vaping that day in yellow, whether they smoked and vaped in orange, so-called dual use, or whether they abstained from both. And what you can see here is that there is no one set pattern. Everybody has their own journey, and variation is quite common here. So you can see this complex movement at the micro daily level between smoking and vaping, suggesting that people aren't just shifting very linearly from smoking to vaping over time. And these complex movements between smoking and vaping are also seen in macro longitudinal data, which we recently published using the data from the New Zealand Attitudes and Values Study with my fine collaborators here, with this project led by Andre Mason and Damien Scarf. And we explored I'm not going to describe this graph, but you can see that there's flow from smoking to vaping and sometimes back again. And it's not at all linear. Some people transition from smoking to vaping, and other people transition from vaping to smoking. And then my PhD student, Grace T, is hard at work discovering important psychological predictors of vaping in young adults, highlighting that young adults who are more sociable, less conscientious, and who have mental health issues may be more likely to take up vaping. Now, along my academic journey, I have supervised outstanding students. I think this is most of them. It doesn't have my undergraduate research project students, but these are all of my postgraduate students. And with great supervisors from within the Department of Psychology and many other departments. And I'm so proud of my students who've gone on to apply their education and training in government agencies, wellness startups, wellness businesses, private practice as clinical psychologists, health psychologists, and yes, academics. And I've also had incredible collaborators and supportive funders. So here are some of the other collaborators that I wasn't able to feature on the previous slides. And I'm sure even this list is incomplete. I'd also like to acknowledge the support of my current head of department and friend, Jamin Halberstadt, previous heads of department, the Pro-Vice Chancellor for the Division of Sciences for Otago, Professor Richard Barker, for their support and leadership. And as the meme goes, maybe the real outputs were the friends that we made along the way. So, are you happy? If not, what does my science say about how you can be happier? Well, there may be multiple pathways. Eat your 5+ a day of fruits and vegetables, including kiwi fruit and carrots. Get plenty of sunshine and vitamin D. Get high-quality sleep. Exercise daily. Spend at least 20 to 60 minutes in nature every day. Be mindful. Engage in small acts of creativity. Minimize alcohol. Vape only as a smoking cessation tool. And do we do all of these things? No. No, we don't. And that's another challenge, the disconnect between what we know to be good for us and what we do actually do. And perhaps that challenge will be the focus of my research for the next 15 years. Thank you. Thanks, Julie.
Okay. E nā manuhiri te whanau nā hoa hoki o Tamlin Connor o tō tato ahorangi ho tēnā koutou. E okuho mahi o te whare wānanga o tāko, tēnā koutou. Ko Jamin Halberstadt, tōko ingoa. Ko te tumuaki aho o te tari whakamato hinenkaro. E harikoa ana aho I toku taenga mai ki kone whakanui ai I tēnei rā. I am Jamin Halberstadt, head of the Department of Psychology. I am very happy, honored, delighted to be part of the academic party that is supporting the inaugural professorial lecture of my longtime friend and colleague, Professor Tamlin Connor. Thank you all for coming. Welcome to everyone, especially David and Graham. You're looking very cute there. Graham too. So I've known Tamlin a long time, since she was hired here in 2008, maybe met even before that. As soon as I met her, I knew that I'd probably be attending your inaugural professorial lecture one day. I don't think I may have made that sentiment clear when we first met, because all I can remember, I think I sort of ham-handedly said, I think I said you're taller than I thought. It was my was my first thing I said to you. Anyway, I discovered in this process, Tamlin and I share academic relatives. So, like in Maori culture, academic culture acknowledges our debts to our ancestors and their ongoing influence in our lives. So it's sort of interesting to reflect on how Tamlin and I have intersected in our past. So John Thiebaud, that's how I say his name anyway, who Tamlin mentioned, that's her intellectual great-grandparent. As she pointed out, he was supervised by Kurt Lewin, who is considered the founder or first modern social psychologist, which is our field. But his other supervisor was a man named Dorwin Cartwright, who is founder of the study of group dynamics. Cartwright had another student from another marriage, so to speak, who is Bob Zients, who himself is a legend in the field of social psychology, especially in the study of emotions, and he is my own academic grandparent. So Tamlin and I are second cousins once removed. Very exciting. While we're at it, actually Zients' other supervisor was a guy named Daniel Katz. He's the founder of the field of organizational psychology. His great-grandparent was Carl Stumpf, philosopher and founder of Gestalt psychology and also debunker of Clever Hans, the turn-of-the-century horse that supposedly knew how to add and speak German. Stumpf had a especially influential student, Kurt Lewin, who, as you saw, forms a direct line to Tamlin. Hope that is all clear. I can see, though, our intellectual ancestors in Tamlin, the holistic approach of the Gestalt psychologists, the focus on the person in the situation that forms the foundation of social psychology, primacy of emotional experience that Bob Zients promoted, the uncompromising and incisive mind that led Stumpf to see right through a counting horse, not to mention the forthrightness, fearlessness, and iconoclasm of her own PhD supervisor, Lisa Feldman Barrett. And I'd like to think that our shared heritage is part of what led us to study the nature and causes of emotional experiences from at least compatible perspectives. So I am in a position, I think, to say that Tamlin is one of the most exciting psychological scientists working today, both in terms of content and methodology. Happiness, as we've said several times today, happiness and subjective well-being are hot topics. You've noticed, I'm sure, if you've got or been around any teenagers, that it's not, these days, it's not so much how well off you are, it's how well off you feel. And it's not just teenagers who think this either, like real life adults and politicians do as well. So, as we've seen, there are many societies now are turning to measuring health of their economies, not only in these traditional financial terms, but also in social ones. So gross domestic product is out, and the well-being economy is in. And of course, people don't entirely agree on what makes for a satisfying or rewarding life. But what is interesting now is that these efforts to kind of quantify the good and rewarding life include what people themselves think about their own subjective happiness. We ask people themselves how they're doing. And Tamlin's work gets right to the heart of this matter, asking directly what the behaviors are that are associated with well-being, and tracking these in nearly real time using cutting-edge technologies. And her work provides, real, practical, evidence-based answers, right? Fruits and vegetables, sleep, nature, mindfulness, creativity. I guess I'll hold off on the alcohol for the moment. And Tamlin, don't listen to those Redditors who say that it's all obvious. Guys, look, if they knew so much about well-being, what are they doing on social media to start with? Social psychology, anyway, is littered with debunkings of things that we thought we knew all along. This is kind of social psychology's thing. And it's especially true in the case of well-being, as is sort of famously the case in the relationship between wealth and happiness, which is, maybe not flat, but at least kind of non-linear. So if you have no money, you will probably be a little happier if you get some. But being rich is not the key to happiness. And the benefits of diet could easily have mimicked those of wealth, something that seems obvious but just turns out not to be true, right? I think this is true. Julia Child said the only time you need to eat diet food is while you're waiting for the steak to cook. So, and diet food, I think that's old-timey talk for fruits and vegetables. So anyway, the point is that people don't know what will make them happy. So don't listen to those who say they do unless they come with data like Professor Connor. So not only does she have data on what makes you happy, she has something to say about what makes you happy. So her longitudinal cross-lag studies allow us to start to make causal inferences about these factors. This is causality from correlation. It's like almost like magic, only science. So Tamlin, kapai, congratulations on your outstanding, if inevitable, success. I want to thank everyone for coming, and I am instructed to invite you all, no, I'm pleased to invite you all, sorry, to the, is it in the staff club? Is that where we're gonna be? Staff club, where there will be refreshments, maybe canapes, I'm not sure. And we have a special gift for you, Tamlin, if you would like to come up and receive it with any special guests you want to bring with you. You're very welcome. So that's all for me. Please join me one more time in thanking Tamlin and all of our hosts today for your talk, and please come and join us to celebrate in the staff club.